Welcome again. I'm Joel Moskowitz, the Executive Director of the America Israel Cannabis Association, otherwise known as ICA, and the chief sponsor of this event. Our next guest is Shabnam Malek. She is an attorney who is a partner with Brand and Branch LLP. She is also the Executive Director of the National Cannabis Bar Association. She is involved with the National Cannabis Industry Association and Women Grow, and the founder of Synchronicity Sisters, which we will describe and get into a little later in our conversation. Shabnam's practice has kind of evolved towards cannabis only, and she deals particularly with domestic and international trademark clearance, rights, registration, and enforcement. And we're going to ask her a lot of questions about that. Welcome, Shabnam.
Thank you.
All right. So, the average person, like myself, would not think that cannabis, which is a plant, would have intellectual property associated with it. So, can you give us a little explanation of that?
Sure. That's a great question. Let me just quickly clarify a couple of things about that terrific introduction you gave. I'm one of 4 co-founders, actually, of Synchronicity. I work with 3 other women, all of whom are involved in the cannabis industry and pulling that project together, and we'll get to that later. I'm really excited to talk about that. But so let's get to intellectual property in cannabis. So my law partner, Amanda Conley, and I, we formed Brand and Branch to really focus on the cannabis industry. We do serve some non-cannabis clients, but the bulk of our work is in serving cannabis clients. And you'd be surprised. There are a lot of intellectual property issues in the world of cannabis. And some of the most important topics that we work on have to do with developing and protecting brand names in cannabis. So what does that mean? For our clients, oftentimes it means the name of the actual product, whether that is a pre-roll or an edible product, or maybe a beverage, a dispensary. And you can imagine that in the world of cannabis, having a strong and distinctive brand and being able to protect it is really important. And maybe for those folks who can't imagine why it's important, let me just illustrate some of the ways where brand protection can be very important. Right. So cannabis, medical cannabis, in many states is for medical use, and even the states where there is an adult use market, it's really important that the product either not get into the wrong hands or the right type of product get into the right hands. And so what I mean by that is if you've got a person who wants to engage in adult use, say in Colorado, and they know that they have a very low tolerance, they're not a frequent user of cannabis, they're going to want a low dosage product. So if they go to their local dispensary and they see a brand name that they've come to associate with a product that they know the effects, they know they're comfortable with the dosage, they're going to want to buy that. They're going to rely on that name. If another entity enters the market using that same name but produces a different product with a different type of cannabis in it or a stronger dosage, that could be really harmful. You can see where I'm going with this. That can be really harmful to the consumer. And so it's important that we have distinctive brands in this industry and that we protect them. And this reason is actually the very premise of trademark law, right? Trademark law is a product of consumer protection. What we're doing is trying to prevent confusion in the marketplace so that consumers are protected when they make purchasing decisions. And when you have something as important as the decision about what kind of cannabis or medical cannabis product to buy, really brand protection and trademark law become of utmost importance.
So now that leads me to another question, which I was going to get to anyway because you're an attorney and the legal issues involved in the cannabis industry are vast, and there's a lot of things we could talk about. But there's this a gap or a chasm between state laws, states that have approved marijuana, and the fact that the federal government still classifies cannabis as a Schedule I narcotic, which apparently has no medical value. That's what it means, and that it's even considered to be worse for you than Walter White stuff.
Opiates?
The stuff, whatever it was. Anyway, so the point is that if someone infringes on somebody else's trademark in the cannabis industry, is there an impediment because of the legal issues or the legal gray area with the federal government of bringing suit to someone?
God, that is such a good question. Okay, so and it's a lot of questions actually. I've got a lot of answers. I'm just gonna
Good.
talk.
Take
So
your
you
time.
interrupt
Yeah.
me if I talk too much. So the state-federal divide is really important for trademark lawyers. Ordinarily, in my pre-cannabis law trademark practice, I almost exclusively operated in the federal sphere. Right? You would never have thought to go to a state secretary of state to seek protection for a trademark, which you can do, by the way. There's no sort of federalism issue there. The states issue trademark registrations. The federal government does it. It's fine. This has been happening for years. So when we started getting into the field of cannabis, we realized that, gosh, these state trademark registrations are actually really important. And we do need to go and seek out protection for clients' core goods and services. That means the actual infused products oftentimes at the state level, while simultaneously trying to protect some measure of goods and services at the federal level, the Patent Trademark Office. Often what we're protecting at the federal level, though, does not cover the core goods and services. It covers sort of ancillary goods and services. Almost all of our clients engage in some level of consulting services, educational services. There's something going on. And for those things, we go to the Patent and Trademark Office. So that's how we piece together the protection of the trademark and sort of balance the federal rights and the state rights so that we can give as much protection to the client as possible.
Have you gotten any resistance on the federal level?
Yeah, and we do see actually what a big part of our practice is interacting with the Patent and Trademark Office and overcoming what we refer to colloquially as CSA refusals or CSA inquiries. So that means that we apply to register the mark with the Patent and Trademark Office. None of the goods and services include products that are unlawful under the Controlled Substances Act, but the examining attorney has an idea that this entity or these goods and services might peripherally be involved in the cannabis space. Often we'll say consulting services related to the field of medical cannabis, something like that. So from that point, the examining attorney issues a refusal. It's called an office action, and that office action will contain an inquiry that says, for example, do any of the stated goods and services, involve the sale, trade, or exchange of marijuana? Or does the applicant engage in activities that involve the manufacture, sell, or trade of marijuana? So we call that a CSA refusal or inquiry, and we deal with these all the time. We are able to, because of the way we file the applications to begin with, we are able to answer these inquiries honestly and in a way that overcomes them and lets the applications proceed to registration. But having said that, you can be assured that we get these inquiries and these refusals. And we deal with the Patent and Trademark Office a lot, and I can tell you that there's actually about 3 examining attorneys who spend a bulk of their time focusing on these cannabis applications, and there's so many that you can imagine. 3 attorneys at the Patent and Trademark Office focusing just on trademark examinations are now spending their time reviewing these applications. So we are, dealing with these issues on a daily basis, how to overcome the CSA refusals.
Well, that's good news because that just shows that the federal government is sort of giving in to what is inevitable. Which leads me to just a follow-up to that question. You were recently quoted in an article in Newsweek called "Women in Weed," and I'm going to get back to that because I've got quite a few questions about women in weed and the article and the actual premise. But they cited a case that an attorney by the name of Rachel Gillette sued the IRS and won, because the client apparently was charged a 10% premium for paying his taxes in cash, and of course he couldn't pay it any other way because he wasn't able to open a bank account. So to a certain extent, there is this legal kind of tug of war between those that are sympathetic to the states passing the laws and those on the federal level who still are against it. Can you elaborate a little bit about that, or tell us a little bit more about things like that?
Yeah. So Rachel is a colleague. She's a friend. She's a member of the National Cannabis Bar Association. I love her work. I think she's a terrific attorney. And she does. working often and really sort of struggling and getting gains, and then oftentimes there's setbacks in this field of tax law. So what Rachel's doing is just terrific, and I have had the opportunity to present with her, and she's doing some really great work. For us, that this issue does come about, this sort of tug of war, and where we see it is really in two areas. One is directly on point at the Patent and Trademark Office, where we can get applications through for certain goods and services, even where the word cannabis is in the goods and services, but the goods and services of the applicant don't actually involve the manufacture, trade, or sale of cannabis. Mm-hmm. But we then, on the other side of that, we cannot get applications, trademarks registered to the Patent and Trademark Office for goods that actually do involve our clients' core services, right? An edible infused with medical cannabis, or a retail store services involving medical cannabis. So there is this sort of tug of war, and it makes it really difficult for us to do our jobs, as this exactly the case with Rachel. We can give some amount of protection and relief to our clients, but at the end of the day, we're being refused rights at the Patent and Trademark Office because of this sort of hovering Controlled Substances Act issue. And so it's difficult for us, which I'm guessing folks like Rachel, people in the tax field, are also facing, is that we're not going to, the Patent and Trademark Office can't sort of on its own, out of whole cloth, decide, okay, starting tomorrow, we're going to grant these applications. In fact, they did do that a few years ago. The Patent and Trademark Office, out of whole cloth, decided to grant trademark registrations to folks with goods and services, including, infused products. And that was very short-lived, and whatever sort of unspoken policy it was immediately revoked. So we can't see that kind of change at the PTO. What we need to wait for, and makes it sort of a long-term struggle for us, is we're going to need to see actual change either at the Controlled Substances Act level, a reclassification, or some sort of congressional change that then allows the Patent and Trademark Office to change their own internal policy. There's sort of many layers at work here. A great illustration of this, even at the state level, is, for example, in California state, even though we have a lawful, though unclear, framework for medical cannabis, our Secretary of State will refuse right now some applications for trademarks that include goods and services that are lawful at the state level, but unlawful at the federal level. And so this struggle for us at the Patent and Trademark Office is actually happening right here at home too, in California state, where some part of the Secretary of State's office will allow our clients to engage in the cultivation practice or manufacture or dispensing of medical cannabis. They can form their entity, and the Secretary of State accepts that, allows that, and then this totally different office, 3 doors down potentially at the Secretary of State, is disallowing trademark registrations for those same folks under a completely different set of guidelines that the federal government is applying. So we're constantly in struggle, exactly in the same way as tax lawyers are, as corporate attorneys are, with this little bit, tiny bit here is legal. And then there's this other bit here that's unlawful.
So one thing I'm getting from our conversation straight off the top is that any business that you open, and ever, you always need legal advice, whether you're forming a corporation or stuff like that. But in a highly regulated business, especially one with so many nuances and the differences, like we said, the tug of war between the federal and the state level, it's obviously very, very necessary to have someone who's knowledgeable and is aware of the laws and the nuances that are going on. But I have another question, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. So the cannabis plant, or the medical parts of the cannabis plant, the two main ingredients are the THC and the CBD. And to the best of my knowledge, the CBD itself is not the part that's illegal, right? But on the other hand, much of the science right now is showing that the higher concentrations of the CBD have medical value. How is it possible that the federal government can classify something as not having no medical value when there's plethora of scientific research that's showing that certainly the I don't know how to call it, narcotic part of the thing of the plant is safe for medical use?
Well, let me clarify one thing about the CBD issue. So CBD derived from the cannabis plant that you and I sort of know as the marijuana plant, pot, that CBD derived, that's actually not lawful in the United States as a whole, and for transport across state lines, it's not lawful.
No.
The CBD that is lawful is industrial hemp-derived CBD, which is in this hemp in general is in this weird framework of kind of illegal, kind of legal. You may possess it in the United States, you may import it into the United States, but generally you may not grow it. Though there are some states where now the growing of hemp, cultivation of hemp is lawful. But in any case, I'm not an expert in that area. But setting that aside, the CBD that you're talking about, this lawful CBD, is hemp-derived CBD. And so, okay, so I'm not a scientist. This is definitely someone, you want to get someone like Amanda Ryman, who's really a policymaker and also really has been studying the plant for years to talk about this, but I'll give you kind of a brief overview. So the CBD that is hemp-derived, that is the CBD actually that has become sort of the subject of some of these FDA inquiries and these letters that some manufacturers are getting. That's the CBD people are making a lot of really big promises about, and it's sort of unclear what the medical and therapeutic values are. The CBD that a lot of people are claiming has a lot of medical and therapeutic values is the CBD derived from cannabis that is, again, lawful only in the states where you have either medical or recreation adult use.
So from a legal point of view,
cannabis, yeah.
From a legal point of view, will the argument ultimately, and it will ultimately get to the courts in the federal level? I'm sure that there'll be some sort of challenge to the state laws and something like that, and it'll eventually put this to rest. That's probably what's going to do it years from now, because I know that Congress doesn't seem to get together about anything. They're certainly not going to be able to get together about this.
Right.
And if Obama is not going to push to classify it, unless we get Bernie Sanders, I'm doubtful anybody else is really going to push for taking marijuana as from a Schedule I to a more legal use. So the question that I'm getting towards is, what do you feel is the legal outlook? How are things looking for the future of the cannabis industry? Is this going to trudge along slowly, or is this going to be sort of like the gay marriage thing, where it's just going to pick up a momentum and it's just going to happen?
I mean, I think that's actually a really great analogy, and my law partner Amanda and I talk about this all the time, the sort of parallels between the gay marriage movement and the legalization of marijuana. I think that what we're going to see is still more activity at the state level. I don't think that in the short term we're going to see a big sea change at the federal level. I think we're still looking at sort of the laboratories type concept. And in particular, there's several states, including California, that are trying to get voter initiatives going where we legalize marijuana on an adult use level. So I think that that's probably where the action is at right now. And for lawyers practicing in the space, that's where our action is, understanding the regulations in every state that does create some sort of legal framework. It's not enough to just sort of pass a law, right? You have to have a robust set of regulations that dictates how people interpret and apply those laws. In Colorado, they're still working out their regs. In Washington, they're still working out their regs. And same with Oregon. So and I think that the federal government might even in some ways sort of be waiting to see what the best application is for either a lawful medical marijuana regime or for some sort of adult use. But this issue of having a law and then having regulations that support it, it's huge. And it's where lawyers really work, right? Mm-hmm. This is our bread and butter. So you see that in New York, they made some version of medical marijuana lawful. But when you dig deep into their regs, for a trademark lawyer, oh my gosh, they are all but outlawing the use of distinctive brands on their medical marijuana extracts. So you can have a law, but what are you going to do with that law? How is the licensing going to work? And how are folks going to be able to apply their intellectual property and protect their intellectual property? So we have so much more to do just in terms of figuring out how we create a regulatory system. Right. You see in Colorado with the labeling issues, they're still working on precautionary measures for the labeling of edibles. Edibles is a big one. You open up the floodgates, and this is what you get. You get a lot of edibles in the industry, and people love this stuff. It's terrific. There's low dose, there's high dose. In California, we've got a very robust edibles market. But here you have in Colorado the situation where the regulators are very concerned about what happens when this edible product makes it back into the house, and you've got some children in the house, and how are we maintaining these warnings on these products so that the parents or the children or the teenagers aren't mistakenly consuming. So I think that where the legal action is going to be is in the regulatory infrastructure of cannabis laws, not just the law, but this other thing that happens right
Sort
down.
of like the protocols.
Exactly.
The protocols of
exactly.
setting up a system, and we're going to be speaking to Andrew Friedman, who is the what
Right.
they call him the marijuana czar in Colorado, about that. And I and I will definitely address that with him when we speak. We don't have a lot more time, so I want to just get to a couple of other things. I want to just ask you a question that I ask a lot of people: is marijuana, legalization of marijuana, is it a human rights issue to you?
I think in the United States it is. Yeah, I think in terms of the application of the drug war and the who is going to prison for what kinds of drug-related crimes makes it a human rights issue in the United States. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
And it,
having said that, okay, there's a very, very large segment of the population that believes that the war on drugs, or the so-called war on drugs, is just. Can there be a war on drugs without marijuana in the mix?
that's a really interesting question. So can we sort of legalize marijuana and then keep a war on drugs, and we're still going after heroin and cocaine, or
Yeah,
illegal.
I think that that's a legitimate question that a lot of people that are on the fence want to know.
Well, I'm of the mindset that there should not be any kind of war on any kind of drugs. That doesn't solve sort of the problem of drug consumption. I mean, if the problem of drug consumption is crime or addiction, which is sort of the two ends of it, right? Addiction for the users and what sort of stems from addiction, what kind of behavior stems from addiction. Then on the other side, from the seller point of view, is sort of the crime that surrounds it. When you have any kind of illegal operation, you may have guns, you have crime, you may have gangs. I think neither of those two things are necessarily addressed by a criminal justice war, and actually a political, really, war on drugs. I mean, I think one of them is a medical issue, a health issue, and no addict of any kind of drug is ever served well by being imprisoned. That's never been the case.
Right.
And then on the other end, I think that it's in fact exactly the opposite. Once you legalize an industry and you bring it out of the shadows, you help eliminate the criminal element. And so I don't think either of those two issues in any kind of drug consumption or with respect to any kind of drugs is served well by a war on the drug.
Right, and the argument is if you were to ask any doctor, and I asked one of our speakers, Dr. David Casseret, if I gave you a list of 5 things, which is from worst to least worst for you, and I listed tobacco, alcohol, saturated fats, sugar, and marijuana. Marijuana was in the bottom of the list, and the tobacco was at the top of the list.
Right.
So, those are all legal substances, and that's the age-old conundrum with the cannabis industry, and we have a lot to look forward to in changes there. Tell us something about Synchronicity Sisters before we have to go, because I read about it and it's quite interesting. It's sort of like this: women get together and they share, like a Tupperware party, kind of the things that they legally grow in cannabis, and you taste it, and I guess you talk about it. Maybe it's like a book club. Tell us something about it, because that really interests me.
Yeah.
It interests a lot of people, I think. Tell us about it. It sounds really cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. So it started with myself, my law partner Amanda Conley, one of our close friends and colleagues Issa Marie Perez, and another of our close friends and colleague Chelsea McCrill. So the 4 of us had sort of gone to know each other through Women Grow meetings, and we realized all kind of in our professional lives and in our personal lives that there is a pretty big segment of the industry here in California that includes mostly, if not sort of all from our perspective, women who are feeling a little bit left out of the medical cannabis scene here. And they're feeling a little bit left out of the dispensary scene. They're feeling a little bit left out of the progress that's being made. And I'll give you a really good example. I know a lot of folks, a lot of women in their sort of mid to early 40s who may have been medical cannabis consumers in their 20s. Maybe they smoked a joint, that sort of thing through college, but haven't really been aware of the advances in, cannabis products in the past 20 years, and now sort of want to reintroduce themselves to it, but they don't know where to go. They don't know what a vape pen is. They don't really know what CBD is or what the different kind of edibles can do. So we have set out to gather these women in small, intimate groups and bring some of the most unique and women-targeted products to them to taste, to sample, and most importantly, to educate. So at our events, oftentimes we'll have someone like Nurse Eloise Thiessen from the American Cannabis Nurses Association coming in and talking to a small group of 15, 20 women about specific therapeutic issues that medical cannabis may support, may assist with.
Can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah.
Are there women-related things, say postpartum depression as
Yes.
one of them, that cannabis specifically can help? Are there certain symptoms that are specific to women that cannabis is good for?
Yeah, so menstrual pain, headaches, anxiety issues and anxiety disorders, and
Men
all
have
of
anxiety disorders too.
Right. Well, all of these are good, or I should say, medical cannabis provides therapy and relief for conditions like these. And in fact, we find that women are the majority of the group that are diagnosed with these sort of issues. We know that women are more often diagnosed with long-term chronic health issues than men are. And so medical cannabis has a huge, widespread application for women in these therapeutic uses. And again, the CBD, the tinctures, something like Allison Edel's Treatwell line of products, which are a high CBD strain of tincture. So they're really not even designed sort of, to get you high. They are really designed with therapies in mind. I mean, these are terrific products for women in the California market to be aware of, and they just aren't. The women aren't getting to the dispensaries. They're not getting this education. So we took it upon ourselves to invite them, have a little bit of wine, cheese, and crackers, and just sort of let everybody talk. And, I mean, the success has been overwhelming. All of us. We can't even stop talking when we all get together in a group.
Well, I think that has to do with the stuff you're tasting too. So,
yeah, exactly. Maybe. And so, yeah, it's been hugely popular, and it's really opened a lot of people up to new lines of products and a different way to consume cannabis that is much different than what they were doing maybe 20 years ago.
Okay, so that's great. So we have to kind of wind this up. So I want to get to one last thing. The article in Newsweek was talking about women in weed, and the subheading was, will the legalized marijuana industry become the first $1 billion plus industry that's led by women?
Yes, the answer is yes.
The answer is yes. And
yes.
And I have a theory, and I need you to confirm it or deny it for me. I believe that the reason women will take the lead in this industry is because medical marijuana is something that's simpatico. It's for people in pain, and it tends to be that women are the more sensitive sex. I know that that's going to come off as sexist or whatever, but it's true. Guys suck, and women are usually the better, more warm.
Well, I'm not going to argue with the guys suck sentiment,
right?
But I think what you see is in practical terms, what you're saying. I think the practical effect of it is that women are the primary decision makers about consumer products, about healthcare products. They oftentimes are the primary decision makers about the household healthcare measures
right.
and nutrition and dietary measures in the household, and that is sort of the practical effect, and that is why women are an important part of the medical and adult use consumer market for cannabis. And so the thing is, so here's what's interesting, is women are oftentimes the leading purchasers of any number of products, but in no other industry are we seeing women take the leading role in the business end of that. Women are also leading consumers of media, but you don't see women running all of media. I think the difference with why women are taking a leading role in the business side of cannabis and not just because they are a big part of the consumer end, is because it's a small industry that women have early on taken a leading role in and are inviting other women. And I'll tell you, I'm just going to point straight to Jasmine Hupp, Jane West, and Julie Batkowitz at Women Grow. I think that it's because of organizations like Women Grow, where a handful of women came right out and stepped right out from the beginning and took leadership roles and then invited other women in. made an environment, a business environment, where women could get involved and take leadership roles, I think that's why you're going to see women in this industry.
And I think
we have friends and mentors bringing us in.
And I think that you get a better hearing. Women, when they get together as women and decide on something, it usually is much more effective than when guys start to get it. Look at MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, woman-based organization. Started that way. It achieved a lot. So it's people like you and women in particular that are going to help us bring the industry out and the open. The name of the law firm, my friends, is Brandon Branch. If you're in California and trying to get into or need assistance legally in the cannabis business, contact Brandon Branch. Shabnam Malek is the partner we have just spoken to. I want to thank you very much for participating today, and I'm hoping that you'll be at our next conference, which should be soon.
Thank you so much. I'd be honored.
All right, thanks.